as a second parcel here, and it's not ringing enough for me.
Let's gavel this to order then. Yuko Asada. I am Josh Quillen. For other folks who maybe don't know, this is our going to be our first episode of the Pan and Tune podcast with Yuko Asada and Josh Quillen. And I think it's important for us to. We've been texting a bit back and forth about how to introduce this to folks and also how to make it clear what our intent is, because intent and context is something that's crucially important to me, but also is important to the history of steel pan and what it is that we're all talking about and learning about here. And you are someone who I've known in the world for a while, but through Cliff Alexis.
Right.
And I thought it was interesting, maybe before we get into maybe Cliff, just maybe for you to tell us, the listeners, people who are listening or watching, who you are, why are you on this podcast with me, and then why you think I'm on the podcast with you, and we can go, and then I'll do a little bit of background on me, and then I would love to spend the bulk of the time talking about, I think, our mutual colleague, friend, mentor. I mean, he wasn't my mutual husband; he was your husband. So I'll stop. That's I stop at the water's edge there. But he is someone for whom both of us, he was incredibly important, and I think for the history of the art form. So, if that seems like an okay plan for you, I would just love to
Perfect.
turn the floor over to you and learn a little bit more about you.
Sure. Okay. Well, thank you, Josh.
Mhm.
So my name is Yuko Asada. I am from Japan, and I lived in Japan for 10 years. And when I lived in Japan, I started learning music through Yamaha Music School. And what that contained was a lot of singing and also ensemble playing using smaller instruments. So that is where I fell in love with playing with other people. And I started playing the piano when I was 6. And after moving to the United States at age 10, I continued to play the piano. I first saw the steel pan or steel band performing in Wheeling, West Virginia. So that is where I grew up and lived from age 10 until 20 or so.
Well, sorry to
And
interrupt you. Go. I did not know that you grew up in Wheeling, West. See, this is why we do this
oh,
podcast. I've known you for 10 years now, and I feel like I never knew that you grew up in Wheeling, West Virginia.
oh, okay, okay. Yeah, that's why I have like a lot of I feel super close to people from University of Akron. And
Hmm.
one reason is because of Cliff, but the other reason is because I grew up, 2 hours away from Akron. So yeah, yeah. So,
Well, and how
so
close is Wheeling to Morgantown?
is 1 hour.
Okay, because anyway. Just for future. Well, as we talk later, like that's also like in terms of where Trinidadians landed in the United States. Ellie Manette landed in Morgantown,
That is
and so
right.
just in terms of as we're sort of putting pins in the map of where folks land,
Right.
that's interesting
Yeah.
to me that you grew up really close to Ellie, actually.
Right. So it just happened by chance, but it's
Hmm.
kind of funny because my dad is a metallurgist and he had always worked for a company that made stainless steel. So
Okay,
steel has been
it's been
in
in your
my
life.
family as well. Yeah, my both my grandfathers did something similar too. So it's kind of neat. But I started playing percussion just a little bit in high school, and my high school got a series of steel pans during my senior year. But back then, I didn't really play pan that much.
Hmm.
And after I graduated from high school, I went to West Liberty State College at the time. Now it's called West Liberty University. And the percussion teacher who used to teach was a former Northern Illinois University student, and he had worked closely with Cliff Alexis. So
Who
that's
built
another
who built the
interesting.
drums at your high school?
High school was Panyard,
Okay.
and the West Liberty was Cliff. But now they have different pans.
Okay.
I don't know what happened to Cliff pans, but
That's a whole, like, if I had $1 billion, I would just get in a van and scour the world and be like,
right,
where's the closets where you keep the drums you don't use anymore? Because I'll
yeah,
bet there's a whole treasure trove of
right,
old Cliff
right.
pans around there.
Yeah, I will come and help you, with all the
That's
supplies.
our podcast is just from the road. That's all we do is we're just in our van talking.
Yeah, yeah. So that is actually where I first started playing the steel pan. So I was 18,
Hmm.
And I transferred to West Virginia University in Morgantown, West
Mm-hmm.
Virginia.
Mm.
And like Josh said, that is where the late Ellie resided for many, many years. And I was a piano pedagogy major. Before that, I was actually a composition major, but that only lasted for a semester. And yeah, I became really, really interested in learning more about the pan. And Ellie had a workshop, and I attended the workshop in 2000, and I met Ray Holman
Mm-hmm.
and Andy Narell, Tom Miller, and many, many other people from different parts of the country. And the following year, I went to Trinidad to play in Panorama. It just happened, I don't want to talk forever, so I'm just going to
Pretty
shorten
fun.
it. And that is where I learned about Northern Illinois University
Mm.
and Cliff Alexis, because the year before I first went to Trinidad is when the World Music Festival was happening, and that is where the NIU Steel Band got the second place.
What year was this?
That was 2000.
2000. Okay.
Yeah, and I went to Trinidad in 2001.
Okay.
So what else is interesting is in Trinidad, I was staying with Dr. Janine Remy,
Mm-hmm.
who also graduated from NIU, knew Cliff really well. And she got a package one day and it was from Cliff. So I'm like, okay, who is this Cliff guy from NIU? And she was explaining to me who he was. And when I went back to Morgantown, I started researching a little more about NIU, but back then, internet wasn't all that big
Mm-hmm.
in
I
2001.
think I checked my email once a week back
Right,
when I
right.
was
It was
at the University of Akron. I went up to the computer lab and I was like, well, let's see, and somebody
right,
emailed me like 5 days ago about a gig, and I was like, cool, I'll call them back. It's like the idea that I would wait 5 days to respond to a gig now is just like crazy
right,
town to me.
right. But that's, the way it was back
Mm-hmm.
then. No
Mm-hmm.
smartphones, no advanced technology. But long story short, I went back and decided to pursue my master's at NIU.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, I had no idea about any history between Ellie and Cliff
Mm-hmm.
and any history between WVU and NIU. I was just this ignorant, Asian piano major who just fell in love with the steel pan and went to
Mm-hmm.
Trinidad and heard about NIU and decided to go to NIU. So I decided to go to NIU specifically to learn how to build and tune. And Josh, you've mentioned before that I was one of the people who learned how to build and tune from Cliff, but there were other people who learned as well.
Who
Um,
can you just because I think if we were calling ball just like looking at data points like
mhm.
um there's a couple names that you've mentioned that were sort
Yeah.
of really important to the overall sort of education in the like in terms of American high school, middle school, and college education, like Ray Holman, Tom Miller, Andy Narell were
Ah,
in the room a lot, sort of in those early days, and Andy and Ray, like Andy bringing in folks like Relator and of course
ah,
Ray Holman. Tom
mhm.
has a very close relationship with Ray. So Ray was one of the first sort of arrangers and performers who I met next to Cliff. It was like I met Cliff first, and then like 2 years
Ah,
later, Joan Wenzel brought Ray Holman or
ah,
brought
okay.
Tom, and Tom brought Ray with him,
I see.
as just sort of like he's in town and we were doing a session. And but Ellie, in terms of the places in the United States where you could go to study pan tuning, NIU and WVU are the two places where you could go. At least when I was in school. And more, I think I would say more people came out of WVU to go on and have tuning careers than I think came out of NIU. There's no value
Definitely.
judgment there, but I think I'm just like I don't know as many of the tuners out of NIU as I do out of the
Right.
out of the Cliff scene. So can you just expound my knowledge there? Like who else is doing tuning out of NIU other than you?
Sure. So actually, there was no building and tuning program at WVU. Ellie was an artist in residence, and he had what was called the University Tuning Project,
Mm-hmm.
and that is where like people like Billy, oh my gosh, I can't remember, Billy
And
Sheeter,
Billy Sheeter, yep.
Yeah, Darren Dyke and
Emily
Robbie
Lemmer.
Davis. Yeah, of course. Yeah, Emily. Yeah, those people started to learn how to build and tune. And eventually, Ellie established his own company. The name changed multiple times,
Mm.
but he definitely had quite a number of apprentices
So,
at the
so did I
time.
get that wrong that there wasn't a degree program at WVU?
Right, right. So
Okay, all right. I misunderstood that. But in terms of his sort of like you mentioned the word apprenticeship. I think maybe let's use that word. At WVU, you could be his apprentice. You have many. And it's like so we named off like Billy Sheeter, Emily Lemmerman, Darren Dyke, Alan Coyle,
yeah. Oh yes.
like right. Alan Coyle came from Ellie
Oh
School.
yes. Oh
Okay,
yes.
and it's like, and they have now. You can go and find folk like they're building bands for people. There's a lot of folks in the Cliff world. Was there a degree program at NIU?
No. So I actually majored in performance, but I
Mm-hmm.
was able to specialize in steel pan building and
Oh,
tuning.
okay. All right.
And when I went there, other students became interested in learning how to build and tune as well. So yeah, other people like Abe Breiling,
Mm.
Jason Schneider, they started to learn. But before that, Shannon Dudley actually
Mm.
went to study with Cliff. So
Okay.
Shannon has some experience learning how to build under Cliff's mentorship. And who else? But there weren't that many people. And I believe that is because that wasn't necessarily Cliff's vision
Yeah.
to teach
Mm.
yeah, students to for them to become pan builders and tuners. I just happened to be really interested, and I contacted Cliff, and he and the late Al O'Connor said, yes, you can come and study pan, and Cliff will teach me. So I said, okay. And I came to NIU and realized how difficult it was, definitely physically demanding. And tuning was so confusing, especially because Cliff's method and approach was totally different from Ellie's.
How so?
Ellie's seemed more systematic.
Mm.
So he would set up the note, shape the note in a certain way, like oval notes,
Mm-hmm.
and he would have certain spots and notes would respond like accordingly. But how Cliff approached it was he would look at each steel drums differently. So these containers were not made specifically for steel pans,
Mm-hmm.
so they react differently.
Mm-hmm.
So he would tune based on how the note responds. So he will shape the note depending on how the note is shaped, note is responding. So, but there is a specific shape, but not like a oval.
Mm-hmm.
The same concept applies, but for me at the time, it was so different that I just like my brain just froze and couldn't really learn how to tune for the longest time. So I just
Well,
kept building and building and building.
yeah, I mean, his approach, I would love to sort of drill down deeper on the Cliff approach to things because that's something I think, I could speculate on Ellie's approach, but I never actually met Ellie, like,
Mhm.
but the times that I've been in the room with Cliff, there was a little bit of a like, sort of snatch the pebble from my hand, sort of, the sort of like you're gonna be like catch the fly with the chopsticks sort of thing out of the air, and you're like how, and he's just like there is no how, it's only do. And you're just like, what? And like those sorts of things from Cliff, I found like his answers were very much a like, I'll tell you when you find it, and it's like that's not an answer. Like, what do you mean? And I don't want to. It implies I'm implying a little bit here that like he held his cards close to his chest, and it was only with people who he like implicitly trusted that he'd be
Yeah,
like, here's how you shape this note. And I'm curious, am I misdiagnosing any of what I've seen in Cliff?
you don't, and no, you're not misdiagnosing at all. And that is the reason why it was so difficult for me too, because he didn't necessarily give me specific answers in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, okay, so what do you mean? Like, how do I do it? How do I approach it? And just say, observe, just watch what I do. And I would, but it's so different from just watching and doing.
Mm-hmm.
So 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 what's been happening more and more is Cliff's words coming back to me, and just clicking and thinking, oh, this is what Cliff meant, but he didn't know how to explain. And I can understand why it would be so hard to explain.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, as the older I get, the more I understand my teachers and some of and their limitations in terms of what they're able to, how they're able to express their process to me. You know, whether it
Right.
be Dr. Larry Snyder, who never had a very like, it wasn't that his approach wasn't process based. Like there was like stuff you had to go through,
Uh-huh.
but there was often like a bigger picture approach to your playing. Like, you know, I remember he was the first person to sort of have me sort of analyze something, like think about something abstractly. Like, how would you play this if you were a mouse? How would you play this if you were a bear? Like, that seems sort of like third grade, like, you know, be more like a coconut or something, you know. But I don't think it's unimportant for students to just have that part of their brain as a tool. Like, I wonder, like, is that a way to think about things, you know? But then you go study with, you know, Bob Van Cise at Yale, where the approach was like, here's how you're gonna cue, and it was like,
Ah,
you know, and there was like, we did that thousands of times, you know, and that's why I play in so percussion, because we really drilled down on those details. But with tuning, yeah, I've been in the room with Cliff and he's tuning something and he just will swear at a note and stomp away, and he's like, that's what you have to do sometimes, and I'm like, really?
oh,
You know, and he would just yell and scream and like tell me that the note was a like an old like relative of his that he never got along with, and like there was all this abstract stuff that he was applying to that note, like it
yeah,
had a personality, like there was a person in that note, and he had
right.
notes on those like he kept notes on the C naturals at the drums at Akron that he would tune on the cellos, and he's just like, all right, like he was about to get in an argument with a drunk family member at Thanksgiving or something, you know, like
You know, I
it.
can
He knew it
totally.
personally, and that's hard to express a process there. Like, how do you express? How do you express to somebody why you keep your crazy uncle in the family? Like, that's that's the thing, you know.
Uh-huh,
It's family.
uh-huh.
I made it, you know.
Yeah, 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 yeah. You know, it is definitely important to step back and just like take a little break, because when you're so focused for hours at a time, trying to match all the pitches, and you're hearing all kinds of partials everywhere else on the pan too. So yeah, so sometimes you just need to refreshing your hearing and just calm down. But Cliff was, you know, who he was, so he expressed, you know, different emotions the way he did.
Hmm.
And you're totally right about how he was, you know, in terms of who he wanted around.
Hmm.
And trust was it. So, you know, there were different levels of trust. And, you know, of course, he trusted his students, but, you know, did he let all of those students to come to his personal space? No, you know, things like that. But,
Hmm.
you know, people like you, Dr. Snyder, Matt Dudak, you know, like he loved you guys so much. He loved the University of Akron so much. So, yeah, I mean,
Well, I want to let's move. I don't think it's like super important that I lay out what my background is, because I have a million podcasts where I'm telling all the stories. So if people want to hear more about my back, I mean, I'll just do a quick, like, I went to Dover
yeah.
High School, which is in 1994 is when I 1993 is when I first saw any steel band at all, any steel drum at all. Joan Wenzel brought the steel band to the sort of instrument petting zoo at my middle school, or at
Ah,
my elementary school, which was like, we're gonna do the trombone. Beep. Here's a string player. Beep. You know, like you do the ghosty thing on the strings, then you make a sound on the clarinet, just to be like, what instrument do you want to play?
yeah.
And when I was in fifth grade, I saw, or sorry, excuse me, in fifth grade is when I saw the steel band, because she brought the band to play. And then I was like, well, I mean, yeah, no, trombone's cool. It's nice to go beep, but like that, I want to do what she's doing. Like that looks really rad. And so
Hmm.
I ended up playing percussion, and then in my freshman year, like 3 or 4 years later, I joined the steel band at Dover High School, which is where I met Cliff for the first time. He came into tune, probably 1997 or 6 or 7, I think is,
Okay.
um, and he came into tune. The very first thing he did, and I've said this a million times, but this is like my first experience with police oppression, was with Cliff, where
Oh,
he was like, the first thing he did before he even said hello, my name is, he was like, look at my head. And I was like, what? He's like, I've
Oh
got scars on the back of my head.
my
I was like,
gosh.
what? I was like, my name's Josh. And
Right,
I was like,
right.
I have to go to
Oh,
band practice, you know. And he's like, they used to beat me for playing pan, and now you play it in high school. And I was like, I didn't. I now understand what he was trying to say to me in a loving way, but I like at the time I sort of was like, I didn't. It didn't. I felt like he was giving me some sort of like piece of paper with writing on it. I just didn't understand, but I knew that I needed to keep. And so I was like, all right. And then time goes on, and the more I talk to Cliff, the more I learn about the history of the instrument, the
ah,
more I learn about police violence in the United States and slavery and racism and what all this, how all this intertwines, immigration. Now I'm just like taking out those old things that Cliff gave me, and I'm like, oh, that's what he. All right, this makes sense. So then I went from high school. I went to Ohio State University for 2 years. Played. They had a steel band there. Actually, Michael Bump ran the steel band program there. They had a small set of Cliff drums. They had about
right, right.
15 drums, I think, all
Oh,
made by Cliff.
oh, wow.
I think they're still there. They were red for Ohio State.
Okay,
They
okay.
might have been just painted red. They might have been NIU style drums that Cliff was like, paint them red and get them out of here, you know.
Hmm.
But anyway, they were great drums, and I remember playing in the band there for 2 years. But the experience there in terms of what the steel band program was like it was more sort of like a class that met once every week and was sort of
Okay.
auxiliary to the program.
Yeah. Mhm.
And I ended up transferring to University of Akron. Actually, with the help of Tom Miller, I had a very intense meeting with Tom Miller at Ohio State, where I was like, I don't know what I'm doing here. I don't, and he was very encouraging. So I ended up transferring to Akron my junior year. Lost all of my class credits and had to basically start over and take summer school
Oh
and like
no.
make up 2 years worth of methods classes and all this jazz when I got to
Ohio
Akron
State?
from Ohio
Ohio
State. Well, Ohio
State.
State was on the quarter system at the
Oh,
time, and
I
so when
see.
I transferred to a semester school, the credits didn't
I
all
see.
transfer. Some of them did, but not all of them. So I had to take some things over again. But um, that's again. Then Cliff came back into my life there. He would come to Akron to tune all the time. I remember the first year he was there that I was there. Larry Snyder made me go pick him up at the airport and drive him around.
Okay.
And I've told the story too that like I picked Cliff up at the airport and he makes me drive to the a black barber shop in Akron, like in downtown
Okay.
Akron, and makes me take. And he's telling me why he can't get his hair cut in DeKalb,
Oh, I
and
see. I see.
that this is his like the place where he feels the most comfortable getting his hair cut. And I'm just like, there's like 1,000 barber shops. Why are we going here? I did not understand anything about what black hair
Yeah.
needed.
Yeah. Same with me actually. I only go to Asian hair salons.
Right, but I don't like. I mean, I'm trying to be careful here. Like, I don't see your hair and think like that needs to be treated differently than mine. But of course, like it's just you go to the places you're most comfortable, like to have your hair styled. And
It's different actually.
yeah, I don't know
Yeah.
how. I mean, how? Sorry, quickly
Right.
tell me how. I don't know. I don't know.
Right, right. Thicker, more hair, and yeah, a lot more than say, Caucasians. Yeah,
Okay.
so
See,
it takes a little more time.
yeah,
Yeah.
I have no idea. And so, but Cliff is just like, so we go to this barber shop, and I've told the story 1,000 times, but I think it's important to say it again. Like we walk in the barber shop, and I'm like, oh my, I'm not supposed to be in here. And he goes, sit over here and don't say a word. It's like, okay. So for 2 hours, he gets his hair cut. For about 15 of those 15 minutes of those 2 hours, they're actually cutting his hair, and they're just talking.
Yeah, yeah,
And I was like, oh, that's what this is. And
yeah.
now the more I learn about again, like what slavery is, what oppression is, all the colonialization, all that stuff, it's like this is therapy. This is where Cliff and these gentlemen feel comfortable talking about. This
And
is where they get
barbers,
their news. This is where they get gossip, like all of this stuff they can't do in a white society. And
yeah.
and so again, just to like that was my one of my first experiences with Cliff in like
Oh,
face to face, and then I have to go pick up Bugsy Sharp at the airport, and Cliff comes
wow.
with me, and they're like, I'm hearing them talk, and I don't understand anything.
Right,
I
right.
cannot follow anything they're saying. I hear the word boy pop out 1,000,000 times, like yeah, boy, like all the time, like that. I was like, that's all I understood.
Hmm.
Um, and then I went to Trinidad the following year.
Okay.
Against Cliff's wishes, I think, and I went down
Oh,
because
right. You didn't mention,
Bugsy and
yeah.
Bugsy invited us, and I told Cliff, I was like, "We're going to Trinidad," and he's like, "You're an idiot," and like he basically tried to discourage me over and over and over again, and
I'm I'm kind of surprised to hear that actually.
not
Yeah,
in like a like don't go, but just a like he was always be like, don't do this, be very careful here. It was like
yeah,
there was a
right,
lot of
right,
sort of like caution and fear
right.
injected into
Yes.
the conversation, and I was like, why is he trying to get me, like why is he telling me all this? Does he not want me to go? I guess that's what I'm saying. It felt like he didn't want me to go, but I was like, okay, anyway. And so I went to Trinidad and played in phase two, and then graduated, went to Yale for grad work, and then got a job teaching at NYU, running the steel band program there. And now I run the program there with Kendall Williams, and he and I both teach a steel band at Princeton University as well. So that's
Right.
sort of the like the nickel and dime tour of my life with Cliff. But I want to like I want to sort of refocus this back to Cliff in particular. Can you mentioned like he was born in 1937, which is
Yeah.
a date I didn't know. Yeah, like I kind of knew roughly how old he was when he passed, but like I didn't. I'm
Yeah.
terrible at math like that. Like Cliff was born in the heat of and sort of grew up as a child. Like when he became a sentient being and was like able to have memories and see things and identify things. Like this was during World War II. Like he was 6 or 7 years old during World War II
Right, right, right.
and
Oh,
was
right.
seeing all of the stuff like the things I'm now telling my students about, like, Yankee Dollar being written by Mighty Sparrow because the soldiers were there was a naval base. Like Cliff was a kid was seeing all this stuff. And
Right, right.
I'm wondering if you can sort of for folks lay out a little bit of like what Cliff's timeline was that like as a child to when he passed away and like what got him like
Sure.
touring with Liberace, like all these little sort of things that get glossed over. Like what was Cliff's sort of
Yeah.
butterfly path through life?
Hopefully I'll get everything right. Some
Yeah, you're
people
gonna miss something and you're gonna regret it later that you didn't say it, but it's okay. We'll
right,
we'll figure it out.
right. The biggest part about Cliff's childhood, especially when he was little, was losing both of his parents at young age. So
How? I didn't know that either.
his mom, I could be wrong. I think his mom passed away after giving birth to his youngest brother, and his father passed away at work. He fell inside of something, big machine, and he
Yeah.
passed away. So life for the little Cliff and his siblings were really, really difficult. And he lived with his stepmom for a while, but she of course didn't treat him or his siblings nicely. And he went to live with his um he called grandma, but was she actually his grandmother? And he lived with his cousin, and of course he it wasn't a pleasant experience for him. So I was telling him that if that didn't happen, he probably didn't feel the need to go to a pan yard, because that pan yards were not a place for people to go to. It was for bad johns, vagabonds, people who were outcasts from the society.
Do
So,
you mind me asking, like, and if it's too personal and you don't want to divulge it
oh,
on Cliff's behalf, just say so. But like, what was the household he was growing up in? Was it just like disarray? Was there violence? Was there abuse? Like, what was the reason? I mean, listen. I've lost a parent, so like that enough is enough to break your psyche and cause you to
right.
have a horrible time. But like, was there anything specific that maybe I don't know about Cliff's upbringing, about his life as a kid?
Um, I guess just not being treated with respect. And in some ways, he had to do a lot more chores than other children.
Mm,
So perhaps he felt like a servant in a way, like he had to do a
mm-hmm.
lot of chores, and he wasn't treated equally like other children. Um, it was really painful to listen when he would talk about his childhood, and that never went away, even when he was 82 years old, and that's when he passed away.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't really go into details, but yeah, anytime he spoke about it, like he just looked like he just wanted to cry.
And that's, I mean,
You know?
as you say that, like I've seen Cliff on the emotional sort of spectrum. I've seen him really stoic. I've seen him
Mhm, mhm.
laugh, and I've seen him really angry.
Yeah,
I've never seen him cry. And like that kind of like breaks my heart to even address the fact that that
yeah,
was a thing he could do, you know.
yeah, yeah. And I believe his personality was developed because of those experiences. He had to be tough.
Mm,
He experienced so much anger and sadness. Um, so so he didn't have anywhere he belonged. And as a teenager, he didn't really want to go home, and he started going to a pan yard. And that is where he met a lot of people who he could relate to,
mm,
people who welcomed him, where he could learn how to play music. And I'm sure that helped him with his self-esteem and
mm-hmm.
confidence. And when he was, oh, how old was he? He was selected to be the arranger of stereophonics and actually enter Panorama,
Mm-hmm.
the very first Panorama in 1963.
Yeah.
Is it
Okay.
62 or
I
63?
I
Was
want to say 60. It's the year that Dan is the man in the van. North Stars won it.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
I want to say 63. I think you're right.
Okay.
It's 1960. And Mama This Is Moss the next year they won again, I think in 64. I think that's right. But if it's wrong, I'll correct it publicly somewhere, but I think that's
Yeah,
right.
I should know all the dates. I should like done some like reviews beforehand,
Well,
but
just go ahead and keep talking. I'll Google it and just I
okay.
want to be sure that we're on the record here. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, so that happened, and he was selected to be on the first national steel band of Trinidad and Tobago, and they toured the United States. One of the places where they went was Mackinac Island in Michigan,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where people were in awe and people enjoyed their performance so much and showed them so much appreciation and love that he and other band members were not receiving in Trinidad and Tobago. So,
Because it was still viewed as like vagabonds and gangs and
right,
stuff. So,
right. So a
and it
lot
was
of people.
1963. You're right. 63.
Okay, good. Whew, okay.
I'm terrible with dates, so like I'm with you 100%.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. Like I remember all of these dates, when Cliff was present, then now like they're slipping away. But anyway, so he and band members went back to Trinidad, but he still had the visa for United States.
Mm-hmm.
So he decided to go back to the United States. And this story is something he shared with so many people. But he only had $5 with him when he was coming to the United States. And he went to New York, and he didn't even know. Oh, what did he like? Somebody was supposed to pick him up, but that person didn't show up. So he just stood there, and Trini woman recognized him because he was on the tour. And was he on TV or like somehow like
Mm-hmm.
no, what was it? But she recognized him from him being a steel band person, and she let him stay with her and her family, her husband, and from there he met people like Ellie Manette. Again, he was with Ellie. He was in the Invaders, so he idolized Ellie when he was in Trinidad.
How much older was Ellie than Cliff?
He was 10 years older than
Also,
Cliff.
and how old was Ellie when he passed?
Oh,
Because they Ellie passed like what 3 or 4 years ago. Again, like I'm terrible with
yeah.
dates, but
No,
I didn't realize that Ellie was that much older than Cliff.
I'm guessing he was 91 or so. He passed away a year before, two
Okay,
years before
right.
Cliff. Yeah.
Okay, I didn't realize that he was that much older. So when he was in Invaders, Ellie was like an elder
He
player
was
in the
the
band.
leader. He was like
Yeah.
everything. He
Okay.
yeah, was the builder tuner, and he was the leader. And yeah, so they met in Brooklyn again. Ellie actually moved to New York a year or two later than Cliff. And that is where they met Murray Narell, Andy Narell's father,
Yeah.
Jeff Narell's father,
Hmm.
and Cliff. Uh, I don't know if he started. Sorry, I should have
No, this is
yeah
great. I mean,
reviewed all the stuff. But BWIA Sunjets was the band that he was arranging for, but he wasn't building or tuning. And he ended up moving to Minnesota and started teaching high school steel band.
so let me ask. Sorry to interrupt. And this always cracks me up, and I feel terrible. So I just want to sort of just admit to my why this is hilarious to me. A Trinidadian man
Yeah,
comes from the Caribbean
yeah,
and makes Minnesota? Like New
yeah,
York, at least I can
yeah.
understand because there's a big Caribbean population there.
Right,
And
right.
immigration was starting to pick up from the Caribbean a lot more into New York at the time. So that, yeah. But Minnesota? Like
Right.
it's a flat tundra of snow and ice. It's a
Yes.
lovely place. And I love the beer and the food and the wild rice. Everything is great there. But how
But
did Cliff land in St. Paul, Minnesota?
because of his
Oh, okay.
ex-wife was from Minnesota, or was she from New York? Oh my gosh, I don't know. But they moved together, and she had a job, and he was able to convince St. Paul Central High School to start a steel band. So he was there for 14 years or so
Oh, wow. Okay.
until Al O'Connor at Northern Illinois University saw his name or heard his name through the Navy Steel Band, but
Yeah.
because Cliff was tuning for them for a while.
Hmm.
And Al tried to convince Cliff to come and tune the pans that at NIU.
Hmm.
And yeah, he would come in tune, but I believe Al had similar experiences like Dr. Larry Snyder, where he would call and call and call, and Cliff would either ignore or hang up.
Well, this is yeah. I mean, this is we talked a little bit earlier about trust, and Cliff is someone like to get into like if you have 10 circles, 10 rings of trust that sort of radiate out from you, and the 10th one is like the stranger you are in behind in line at like Starbucks getting your coffee, and the person closest to you is your husband or wife who you trust
Yeah,
implicitly. Like to get to that inner ring of Cliff, like you had to call him 15 times and get hung up on. Like that was just the thing you had to do. But
yeah,
just to say something out loud, that doesn't. The more I learn about Cliff as in his upbringing, I understand that more.
right,
But
right, right.
I, that is not a good way to build trust with people. The way the way Cliff handled it, you know what I mean? I want to just say that out loud. Like it's worth noting that maybe hanging up on people when they call you isn't the wisest choice. But on the other hand, it is also worth it if you believe in something to keep calling back and try to like make that, which Larry did, and which Al O'Connor did.
Yeah, so I'm surprised to hear about so many people who try to, keep trying to be in touch with Cliff
Yeah,
but I'm sure like a lot of people are like, oh, forget him, like, oh, he's so rude and, this and that. I'm
yeah,
sure a lot of people said that too. But like you said, yeah, because of how, what he went through as a child, trust was something that was really hard to receive for Cliff and to gain as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
I don't want to be disingenuous. I think Cliff has every right. I think it's important for people to be okay with like, why isn't he getting back to me? Like that's ridiculous. Or I had to call him 10 times. Like that feels a certain way. It feels like that isn't the way people should do things. I do think it's also important, especially in the world that we're in now, where we're talking about people's backgrounds and their upbringings and the things
yeah.
they've had to deal with that maybe I haven't. I grew up
And
with both of my parents
yeah, yeah,
who
me too. Me
drove
too.
me to things and let me go to music concerts and took me to Metallica when my girlfriend broke up with me.
Oh,
Like
you
those
have some awesome parents.
my
That's
first yeah, my
awesome.
first live concert was Metallica with my mom and
Wow.
dad and my
Wow.
brother. And yeah, well, it was nice to go because it felt nice because I love Metallica, but you
Mhm.
ever been to a rock concert or metal concert with your parents, Yuko?
No, never,
Yeah.
never.
It's not
Yeah.
that fun. It's sort of embarrassing. You want to be there by yourself. But anyway, um but Cliff didn't have that.
Right. So,
And so
and plus like he had seen so many of, his friends or other people from Trinidad and Tobago being taken advantage of by some people from the United States.
Hmm.
Somebody would go down and record footages of steel bands practicing, recording, audio, and they'll make something out of it when they come back to the United States. But people in Trinidad never heard from them. They were not really credited, or like they were
Right.
not, so going through experiences like that so many times, I believe made him and other people really, really cautious as well. Like you had to be really, really smart.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
he taught me. He was the person in my life who taught me. So I'm just closing the notification about our next podcast. But
Okay. Oh,
the
oh, yeah,
he
that's soon.
that's all right. And we'll wrap up here in a couple. But he was the first person I think in my life who, I mean, I got it in various forms, like from my grandparents or my dad. My dad was this way, sort of like an honor culture approach to
Yeah.
things. Like honor culture is maybe even the wrong word because that's a bit of a broad brush. But like there was a like, if you're in the room with me, I need to know that if this room's on fire, you're gonna help me. Like that's sort of like it's so if you're the type of person that's gonna rat somebody out all the time, if you're gonna like always be the person who says you're doing something wrong, or like that's not someone I want to be around. I don't trust that person
Right.
when we're in the heat of the battle. And Cliff, I think because of the sort of the crucible that he grew up in Trinidad, and the time in which he did, which was a British government at the time. It was a British island up until
Right.
1962. So he's not even living under his own rule, so that's something I can't identify with.
Right.
And he was the first person to be like, Ben Toth
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
slept under a marimba. That's all I needed. And I was like, that makes no sense to me. I can sleep under a marimba. And he's like, but you haven't. And it was like, oh, I mean, that's true. Okay. And he's like, I need 2 cheeseburgers, no meat, just the cheese, Diet Coke. I was like, okay.
Okay.
And then I would go get it for him. And then, like, I would just sit quietly. And it was like, that's how sometimes just shutting your mouth and doing what somebody asks you to do is like, that's how you build a relationship. And oh my God, Yuko, it changed my life. It has
Yeah.
made my relation now it's made some parts of my life scarier because that's a complicated thing to build trust with people, and when my ideology doesn't line up with Cliff's on everything, you
Right.
know
Right.
but
Yeah.
that's not a deal breaker for me, and
Right.
Cliff taught that to me. And so anyway, just to say, like, and I'm sitting here right now holding this,
Oh,
which
yeah.
I wanted to just show people. Cliff passed away a couple years ago, and was his. You sent this to me,
Yeah.
and a scarf as well, which Stephanie has, because Cliff. Every time I called him, I used to just call him and be like, just out of the blue, just to see how he was doing, and the first words out of his mouth would always be, "How's Stephanie?"
Oh,
And he
oh,
always asked about her, and I don't think they even knew each other that well. I think they met once, but he just told me as soon, like the first time he met her, he was just like, don't mess this up, Quillen. And I think he was like, I think you and him maybe were growing closer, and so he was realizing the priorities of like when you find somebody in your life that's
oh,
really going to keep you alive 5 years longer than you would have otherwise. Like, don't mess this up. And this was his magnifying glass that
yep,
he would use to tune when his eyes got bad because of his diabetes and other things. Like, and it still has some stains on it,
yeah, yeah,
and I keep this with me right on my desk just to sort of remind myself that there's always a way you can see things clearer.
yeah,
And it
yeah,
doesn't mean it's going to be easy, and it doesn't mean that you're going to find the answer, but just keep asking questions and keep talking and keep
yeah.
looking. So, anyway, I thank you for that, Yuko. And in that spirit, I want to just like, um, for you and me, I'm curious. My intentions, I want to make sure our intentions line up here for this
Right.
podcast. For me, I think it was really important to lay out a bit about what Cliff meant to both of us,
Yeah.
because I want for this podcast to be nothing. I don't want there to be an agenda in terms of what we feel something should be or shouldn't be. I want this to just be like, oh, cool. I didn't know that Cliff grew up in the household that he did. I didn't know that.
Oh,
I had no idea. I had no idea that he arranged for Stereophonic in 1963. No
Yeah.
idea. I had no idea that Ellie was 10 years older than him. I had no idea that the both of them met Murray Norrell in New York. Now, I had a conversation with Andy where he was talking about his dad, Murray, starting these after school programs.
Yeah.
And it's like, so for me, that's just like I've got all these cords just dangling around in my life, and I'm just like, oh, I can plug that one together. All right,
Yeah.
good. Now, like, and so that for me is what I want this experience for me to be, is just
Wonderful.
piecing. So for you, what do you think? How do you want
Well,
this to sort of meet
uh,
your selfish needs, maybe?
about Cliff's
About the
experience.
podcast. Why
Oh,
why are you interested in doing this podcast?
because I'm curious, and I'm realizing so much on like what I don't know,
Hmm.
like the kind of people who I don't know, and the world is becoming closer, and yeah, I just want to know, and you are the person, who I would love to, I wanted to find out with. And thanks to you for offering me this, platform to share with you and I believe a lot of people just don't know, just like me.
Hmm.
Like, you may see it on Facebook or other social media, and you may develop, different type of, thoughts and opinions. But I feel like once we talk to each other and
Hmm.
understand each other, I mean, not in every cases, but a lot of um, things like kind of get resolved,
Hmm.
or we get to appreciate each other more and appreciate our differences.
Hmm.
So something I've been noticing, realizing a lot more is like I don't feel similar to a lot of people,
Hmm.
and just thinking and feeling that's okay. It's
Yeah,
okay,
yeah. Hmm.
to feel different, or to find other people who may be different, but we have something in common, pan.
Hmm.
We
And
all love pan.
I think the thing I mentioned it up front, maybe before we got on the record, but like the thing that's been dawning on me the older I get, and the more I teach, and the more I get involved in the New York pan scene or in Trinidad or whatever, is that like I have my hand on an elephant, which is the pan world, and I've had my hand where on the elephant I've had my hand is because I was born in a cornfield in Ohio. I met the people I did, and so to me the pan world is like, oh, this, it's rough, and there's a little hair on it, and smooth, and it must be really durable, like where I'm at, right? And this is what the pan world is. Except if you talk to Cliff's hands are on the trunk. And
Hmm.
to him, the pan world is completely different. And when we talk to Mia
Oh,
Gormandy, her hand might be on the foot. And
yeah.
to me, it's like we're all touching an elephant. We just aren't calling it that. Like we're all
Right.
identifying different parts of this. And I don't know if there's a right answer to any of this. It was illuminating to talk to Mia about how the Japanese
Oh,
culture approaches pan. And like, anyway, I want to know more about the elephant. And I want
yeah,
to
me
even know
too.
if, like, I'm assuming it's an elephant because of the people I've talked to. Maybe it's a giraffe. I don't know. Like, so that to me is what I just want to get my hands on more parts of the
Yeah.
animal that we've all experienced so that we can correctly identify what it is this thing can do,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
where it came from and where it's going to go, where it can't go. I mean, there are some limitations to an elephant.
Hmm.
Like, I don't know. Maybe there are some things that Pan can't do. Maybe there. I don't even know if that's a proper question to ask. But like, let's keep talking. And so,
Yeah. Yeah.
well, Yuko, let's take a little bit of a break. We're going to chat
Okay.
with Sheldon Thwaites and Andre White, two sort of the youngest and most sort of like fire breathing performers and arrangers in the New York scene right now. And so I'm really pumped to talk to those guys. But let's take a little bit of a break. We'll come back. I
Okay.
really appreciate this deep dive on Cliff. It really sort of I learned. I've known the man for 20 years, and I've learned more about him. So thank you. That's exactly what this
Oh,
was
my
supposed to do.
pleasure. Yeah, and thank
But
you.
all right, well, we'll see you later. Let's log off, and we'll see you in a little bit.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks, Yuko.
Thank you.
And he has a second parcel here, and it's not ringing enough for me.